I'm Martin Bell, and for much of my life I've been a reporter in the unquiet corners of the world, which is why now I feel an enormous responsibility to shine a light on humanitarian crises and their impact on children, especially now in Syria. I'm here at UNICEF headquarters to meet Matthew Gibbs, UNICEF's specialist in emergencies, and find out more about the emergency in Syria, where for these past years the children have lived through and experienced the unthinkable. Matt, the crisis in Syria is now entering its fourth year. What is the condition of the Syrian children now?
On the whole, it remains shocking, and it's deteriorating for many children. And not only is access to food compromised, but their access to basic health services. And we know last year there was an outbreak of polio, for example, that hadn't been seen for 14 years in Syria. That increases the vulnerability of children exponentially. The lack of schools that provide a protective environment for children. Some 3,000 schools were damaged or destroyed in the crisis. But worst of all, I think, is that children are actually being targeted by armed forces in the context of this crisis. They're targeted for sexual violence. They're being targeted simply because they're on the street, and they remain a legitimate weapon of war for a lot of armed groups. And we also have reports that they've been recruited into armed forces for use as messengers, porters, domestic servants, and fighters. The situation for children and women in Syria is grim.
So many needs, I mean, it's such a desperate crisis. What are the greatest needs? Where can you even begin?
Well, indeed, I think one of the big needs that's really emerging in terms of the long-term impact of the crisis on children is their psychological needs, that having the ability to deal with the trauma that they've faced over the course of this crisis. We estimate that at least 2 million children need immediate access to psychological support. We estimate almost 3 million children need to be in school now. Not only to further their education, but also, of course, to provide that protective environment for them. And those 3 million children at the moment have no access to that kind of support.
There was a huge problem with access. We hear there's now some access to the besieged town of Homs. How do you get through to these children? How do you even begin to reach them?
That access to Homs was brilliant, and that was facilitated by a pause in the pause in fighting to allow humanitarian access. We need more of that to be able to do it. Our teams are there ready. We've been ready for 3 years now to get access to these children. When we do, we literally rush in there with the vaccinations they need, especially measles and polio, which spread like wildfire in these conditions, with other supplies that they need, immediate education material, for example, other vaccinations that they need access to, psychological support we prioritise in these situations, and of course safe water, sanitation and hygiene materials. There remain 1 million children, we think, in these areas that are under siege or in hard-to-reach areas, and we try and get there as soon as we can with all our partner organisations on the ground.
People who support UNICEF, people who fund UNICEF programs, people all over the world are going to ask, what can we do to help? What can we do to help?
I think two things. One is to give money. It's a predictable response from someone like me, I suppose, but it's true that if everyone gives a little bit of their money every week, and we get thousands of contributions like that across the country, that can literally help to save lives, and furthermore to save the life of a child in the long term, particularly in terms of their long-term psychological needs. The second thing is to stay informed. I mean, you know that complex emergencies of this nature become boring sometimes in the press, and they become invisible, and when that happens, the children themselves become invisible, and I think the least we can do is to stay informed about what's going on in Syria.
Thank you. The United Nations has launched its largest ever appeal for people affected by the conflict in Syria. UNICEF is there, and we will stay until we have reached every child.